Okay, so we have our main characters.
Not quite. There was another character that was just as important as the two of us. New York City.
So New York City is like another character.
In anticipation of the upcoming Scream sequel, Scream 6, taking the gang and the franchise out of Woodsboro and all the way to New York City, I thought it might be fun to take a look back at some of the other famous sequels over the years that attempted to revitalize their premise by moving the whole thing to the Big Apple. New York-based sequels were all the rage in the 80s and 90s, and although many of these movies do feature their fair share of monstrous characters, I wanted to focus on the films that best relate to the horror genre specifically, zeroing in on Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, and maybe the darkest entry of them all, 1984's The Muppets Take Manhattan.
Creepy and kind of woohoo, spooky.
All three of these films claim to take the big city by storm, and I thought it might be interesting to explore the impact the city has on our characters, how New York as a setting shapes our stories.
See, New York is such an important part of our lives. It's almost like another character in our story.
Right, you said that.
And determine which, if any of these films, comes closest in their grand design of taking Manhattan. Let's start by addressing the odd man out in this lineup, Friday the 13th Part 8. Out of these three movies, Jason Takes Manhattan is the third best at everything in just about every context. And most notably where it falls short is in its very tenuous relationship and depiction of New York, as most of the movie takes place on a boat on its way to New York from Crystal Lake, likely through some complex network of canals?
Oh, every week there's a canal. Or an inlet. Or a fjord.
Quiet! I will not hear another word against the boat.
And outside of a few lines early on, is completely divorced from the concept and setting of New York until the movie's final act. Due to budget restrictions, the production were forced to scale back most of their original ideas for a New York slasher extravaganza and restructure the majority of the film's story around the cast and characters traveling to the city on a boat, making the film less Jason Takes Manhattan and more Jason takes a boat to spend a couple hours in Manhattan largely unnoticed. Even the majority of the small portion left of the film supposedly depicting New York had to be shot largely in British Columbia, prompting what became an open joke amongst cast members at the time of filming that the movie should be called Jason Takes Vancouver, as the film only had the budget to shoot for 2 days on location in the city. That being said, the 2 days they got to capture Jason walking through Times Square look friggin' amazing, and have become one of the most iconic images in the franchise's history, with Kane Hodder citing the experience as a career highlight, and really makes you wonder how cool this movie might have been if they could have done their originally planned scenes at the Brooklyn Bridge, the Empire State Building, and the Statue of Liberty. But hey, at least we got a really cool boat. I mean, this boat has everything. Shuffleboard, skeet shooting, a boxing gym, even a dance club. Much like our next stop on the New York City sequel horror tour, Joe Dante's absurdist comedy horror masterpiece, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, where the Gremlins find themselves causing a whole new world of havoc in state-of-the-art downtown New York City skyscraper, Clamp Tower. Named after fictional millionaire Daniel Clamp, who's sort of an amalgamation of Southern cable magnate Ted Turner and then New York City icon Donald Trump, actor John Glover's portrayal of Clamp as a stoic, earnest, and charismatic captain of industry feels more like a sincere, idealized version of how millionaires wish to be perceived by the public rather than who they really are, which is kind of par for the course for the satirical and metatextual nature of Gremlins 2, a movie that's much less concerned with taking Manhattan as it is taking it to task, with breakneck joke-a-minute pacing, taking aim at everything from corporate America and Wall Street to rude New Yorkers and frozen yogurt. The sheer variety of what you get in Gremlins 2, from Chinatown to the hokey Canadian restaurant,
How about some horn?
to all the different settings in the Clamp building, from the cable TV sets to the graphic design department to the mad scientist laboratory, and of course the wide variety of crazy gremlins, is a great reflection of the chaotic, multifaceted, industrious, fast-paced identity of the hustle and bustle culture that was emblematic of New York City at the time. The movie pulls you in a million different directions while never letting you forget where you are and the real stakes of the Gremlins being set loose on the greater city, as they easily adapt to the concept of becoming New Yorkers while plotting the very probable demise of humanity were it not for Billy Peltzer's 1 in a million electric gremlin conference call hole-in-one. Gremlins 2 is essentially a live-action Looney Tunes movie, a madcap comedy meets metafictional horror parody of its original self, and dare I say, maybe a better Muppet movie than our final film on our New York City sequel horror tour, 1984's The Muppets Take Manhattan. Muppets Take Manhattan might not have the over-the-top uppercut decapitations or horrifying green slime cocoon monsters of our previous entries, but what it lacks in blood and gore, it more than makes up for in the existential woe of watching the happiest characters of your childhood be crushed by the cruel reality of trying to make it in 1980s New York. In preparation for this video, I decided to revisit all 3 of the original Jim Henson Muppet movies for the first time since childhood, and it was largely a really heartwarming and rewarding experience overall. The original Muppet movie is a really fun road trip comedy with an amazing soundtrack that brings back all those warm, nostalgic feelings of watching the Muppets' first foray on the big screen. The Great Muppet Caper, which is actually the only theatrical Muppet release directed by Henson, is maybe one of the funniest movies ever. Like seriously, if it's been a while since you've seen The Great Muppet Caper, I don't think I could fully comprehend as a kid how unbelievably hilarious this movie is, but I cannot recommend it enough. But by the time they got to Muppets Take Manhattan, Henson was juggling several other projects and turned to longtime collaborator and prolific Muppet performer Frank Oz to take the reins on the newest Muppet feature. Oz, who had co-directed The Dark Crystal alongside Henson a few years previous, was taking his first stab at directing solo, and endeavored to make a more thoughtful and character-driven Muppet movie than those that came before, rewriting the initial script and removing much of the signature madcap chaos and fourth-wall-breaking antics that had become a hallmark of Muppet comedy in favor of something a lot more introspective and honestly, pretty fucking dour. Muppets Take Manhattan sees the Muppets as bright-eyed college graduates with big city hopes to move to New York City and get their musical Manhattan melodies on Broadway. Upon arriving, we get a scene reminiscent of the end of the first Muppet movie where the Muppets make their big pitch and Orson Welles immediately offers them a lucrative contract and happy ending for all. In this movie, however, the excitement is immediately undercut by the revelation that this producer was a con artist trying to scam the Muppets out of all of their money and essentially sets the overall tone for the rest of the movie. This is followed by a montage of the Muppets going through an endless string of rejection, set to a song called You Can't Take No for an Answer, as you follow the Muppets, broken and exhausted, walking aimlessly through the unforgiving streets of New York until they're finally so hard up they're forced to beg for soup at a local diner.
Well, right now we're all broke.
You mean you don't have any money at all?
Well, not really, no.
Kermit loses his cool from the pressure of having all these Muppets' fate on his shoulders.
Can't you take care of yourselves? I don't know what to do next. We failed, okay? We tried and we failed.
And the Muppets, believing themselves to have become a burden to Kermit, decide to give up on their dreams, leave New York, and go their separate ways to start a new life somewhere else. Instead of, I don't know, maybe just pitching in and getting jobs in the city to help support Kermit while he works tirelessly to get everyone on Broadway, instead of just following him around 24 hours a day depending on him for their every move and next meal. Like seriously, how the fuck is this helping? In roughly 20 minutes of runtime, this movie completely destroys the Muppet spirit and breaks up one of the most positive, upbeat gang of children's characters of all time, leaving Kermit alone in the big city to try to scheme his way into Broadway, intermixed between scenes of this poor little frog just trying his hardest not to give up. Even when they finally do secure funding for the show and start bringing the Muppets back together, Kermit gets hit by a fucking car, as if New York itself was determined to send one last yellow cab from the depths of hell to finish off the Muppets for good. Unlike Friday the 13th and Gremlins, where the main draw of the movies are also the main threat to the people and the city itself, in Muppets Take Manhattan, New York City is the antagonist, nearly killing one of the most beloved group of children's characters of all time through sheer force of its own hostile environment and the harsh reality of the hardships of trying to survive in the big city. The Muppets eventually persevere in the end because it's still a kids' movie, to some extent, but the question still remains, who of these movies truly succeeds in conquering the city and taking Manhattan? Jason Takes Manhattan is generally considered one of the lesser Friday the 13th sequels, but honestly, I love all these movies. And the weird anomaly of a horror sequel set in New York taking place almost entirely on a boat is exactly the kind of trash I'm into. Plus, it has one of the best kill scenes in the fight with Julius on the rooftop.
It had really never been done to try and box Jason.
They had planned to have that boxing match take place in Madison Square Garden.
He was punching me for real on every shot to the body, like 66 punches each take.
End of that scene where you see my knuckles very swollen and with blood and stuff all on them, that was real, baby. It was, it was toe to toe.
And set the standard for movies like Leprechaun 3 to just film the bare minimum in a monumental location and completely phone in the rest. Jason certainly never takes Manhattan, but there's never really any indication that his goal is to do so in the first place. As a poor, weary traveler arriving by boat to start a whole new life in his chosen vocation, Jason actually seems to fit in pretty well in New York. That is, until his zombie corpse is engulfed in toxic sewer waste that turns him back into a little kid, I guess. The Gremlins get pretty close to taking Manhattan and do in fact captivate the city in their short time there, even getting their own Broadway musical number before their ultimate demise. I think at the very least, this movie does a great job of representing New York in a fun and colorful way, while still poking fun at the society and culture of the time that make this horrifying story about rabid, oozing pus monsters easily the funnest out of the three. Full disclosure, Gremlins 2 is one of my top 3 favorite movies of all time, along with Gremlins 1, and also Wayne's World.
Dang.
But seriously, if you're interested in watching probably one of the weirdest sequels and just overall movies ever made, I cannot recommend this enough. As for the Muppets, I mean, even though it's pretty rough compared to its predecessors, it's still a Muppet movie, and the vehicle that first introduced the world to the Muppet Babies. It might not be as sentimental as the Muppet movie, or as out-and-out hilarious as the Great Muppet Caper, but there's still a lot of great stuff in here, and it's a neat look at Frank Oz's first solo venture in the director's chair before finally tuning his affinity for satirical, character-driven, cynicism-based comedy in 1986 follow-up venture and puppeteering musical horror masterpiece Little Shop of Horrors. Although initially defeated, disbanded, and nearly destroyed by New York City, at the end of the day, the Muppets are able to persevere against adversity and seem like they may indeed be the closest of the three in their goal of taking Manhattan. I mean, the fact that they survive kind of puts them ahead of their competition either way. And in a city so big that it practically takes on a character of its own.
See, New York is such an important part of our lives. It's almost like another character in our story.
Right, you said that.
Maybe surviving is just about the best you can do. Oh, no, wait, it's Clamp. Clamp took Manhattan. Look, it says right here. He wrote a whole book about it.
And don't forget, pick up your copy of Mr. Clamp's best-selling book, I Took Manhattan.
Okay, cool, yeah, problem solved. Well, I hope you enjoyed our look back on a few of the monsters that endeavored to take Manhattan. And if you'd like to see more videos about the Muppets, Gremlins, Jason, or maybe a follow-up on how Scream fares in the Big Apple.
Holy shit, it's Ghostface!
Let me know in the comments, and consider donating to our Patreon to help us make more in the future. Thanks again for watching.
This is some crazy city. We tried to get a cab up here. Do you know they got Russian guys driving cabs in this burg? I was never crazy. I'm funny. Let me in there! These guys aren't bad. Ooh, your mom baked you an apple pie. Thanks. Somebody sat on it on the bus. I'm sure it'll taste okay, though. Don't mess with Murray Futterman. Look, let's get out of here. This place smells like burnt meatloaf.
There's Daniel.